Hey, everybody, welcome to this week's episode of the Going Somewhere podcast. Today I'm joined by Terry Crist. How are you doing, Terry?
I'm doing fantastic, Stephen. Good to see you. Thanks for having me on the show.
Absolutely. I see in your background, we were talking before this, but it looks nice and sunny down in Phoenix, Arizona. But you guys, you called it cold weather. Is that what it's what's going on?
Shivering, just shivering here. It's 56 degrees today, and I actually turned my heat on yesterday for the first time in like 11 months. So it's hysterical for friends like you who are in other parts of the country. You look on us as if we are weak and without fortitude, but we've just simply adjusted to life in the desert, and 56 degrees is freezing.
Well, and us Northerners, when we come to places like that, I actually part of my honeymoon was in Phoenix, and some of
Oh,
our
okay.
favorite pictures of our honeymoon are me poolside with towels wrapped around all my legs because I wanted to be out in the sun, but I was so sunburnt that any more exposure would have
Yes.
killed me. And so my wife makes fun of me all the time that I was a tomato for half of our honeymoon down in Phoenix. So it goes both ways. It's two sides of a coin, right?
Yeah, I can actually walk out of my building today and pick out every person from Chicago, Colorado, Canada, North Dakota, because you guys are out there with shorts on. And my people, the desert people, have hoodies and hats and puffy jackets. And there's a clear line of distinction at this time of the year from the hardy folks versus the rest of us.
Oh, hey, but you're actually you grew up a little bit in South Dakota. So you get it though.
I do. I do. Yeah. I was born just outside of St. Louis, and my people are from the southern part of Illinois. And my dad was a church planter in his early 20s. I was just a kid. And we moved to South Dakota and there planted a church. And so when I think of the formative years of my childhood, they're in Sturgis, South Dakota. And we had a lot of friends over in North Dakota, went to a lot of church rallies there, and they would come back over to our church there in Sturgis and later Rapid City. So, yeah, I'm a product of the Dakotas, and I've taken my family there quite a number of times and will always self-define as being a South Dakota kid.
I love it. I love it. There's more in common than there isn't. Here's a good follow-up question. Do you ride motorcycle? Or did your dad ever ride motorcycle? Because that's who his people were.
But yeah, my dad didn't. He wasn't that guy. He was a pastor and he worked hard. He actually worked in lead in the gold mine there. So he
Okay.
was a bivocational pastor and made that 20 some odd mile trip every single day. But I rode dirt bikes. And so I raced there during the races. And my dad was a great supporter of keeping me resourced with the mini bike and working hard to buy a little Yamaha YZ80. And so when I would have been 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, I rode motorcycles then. I grew up, went off to college, met and fell in love with my college sweetheart who became my wife. And she said, look, you can do anything on the planet, but please don't ride motorcycles. And it's funny. And she's been happy with me traveling the planet, adventuring, climbing mountains, jumping out of airplanes. None of that seems to bother her, but for whatever reason, man, the motorcycle is not something to be embraced. So no, I don't ride motorcycles. Long answer to a short question, but
Hey,
no.
that's great. It's actually fun. My dad, part of his whole salvation story was he rode bike with some Christians, and they were a huge part in him kind of having a reawakened faith and coming back to Jesus, and that included mission trip style bike rides to Sturgis for the Sturgis rallies, where they would go evangelize people there. So it's pretty fun when we visit Sturgis in that area. My dad's been there in two ways. One as the first side, and then the second as, hey, let's win some people for Jesus. So it's kind of a fun part of our whole world story, how it all ties together.
Yeah, yeah. I tell you, I was exposed to a few things during the motorcycle days, without a doubt. We're going to talk about this book, Loving Samaritans, but
Yes.
it could be loving bikers. I mean, we had the other come in the tens of thousands to be right there in our own community. And yeah, we had an opportunity like you to share the love of Jesus and encounter some people with an expression of God's goodness and grace. But good days, good memories.
Yeah. And well, before we talk about your book and on just the heart of it, do you mind just kind of telling us where you're at now and kind of, we've gotten a little bit of the backstory of your family, obviously your dad being a pastor, church planner. So what are you doing now? Where are you? Well, you're in Phoenix, but what's kind of led you to this point in your leadership journey?
I'm church planting as well and have been my entire adult life. Finished college and immediately planted, and then from there continued on with my education while planting three churches in succession. And about 23 years ago, we moved from Tulsa, which is where we were pastoring at the time, here to the Valley. And we planted a church in a neighborhood in North Scottsdale. And then from there, it expanded, became a second site. We had a large church merge with us. It became our third site. And from there, we've continued to plant both through expanding through expansion and adding campuses, and also raising up and training young church planters that have gone out and planted, some of whom are just doing extraordinarily well, and their work will forever exceed my own, which is a joy. So in this season of life, I'm continuing to pastor and serve right here in the community, in state government. We lead a foster care movement, or a movement of
Wow.
churches that are aligned around foster care concerns and interests. And in addition to that, I'm writing and traveling the world and trying to share the grace of God wherever I can.
I love it. I love it. In your book, Loving Samaritans, the subtitle Radical Kindness in Us versus Them World, is coming out here soon. When it comes out to our listeners, it's already out. And but what kind of inspired you to read it or write it, and kind of what's the heartbeat behind it?
Well, I wrote the book because I do want to inspire people to love others well. And Jesus summarized all the law and the prophets in these two ideas, these two commandments. Number one, that we should love God, and number two, that we should love others as we love ourselves. And I think that's very beautiful. Number one, it's essential and fundamental to our faith. But sometimes it's not easy to live that out. It seems so beautiful and simple until you then begin
Yeah.
to connect with other people and find out just how challenging it is, not only to love our siblings, to love the people within our own extended families, but then to love people whose value system may be significantly different from our own, and their identity and behavior may be something we see as being a challenge, so to speak. So the idea is, how do we love well? And I wrote the book based on this story in the Gospels of Jesus's encounter with the Samaritan woman. And I've long been fascinated with this story because Jesus is in a setting that wasn't typical for a righteous Jew. And he engages in a conversation with a woman that is the longest recorded conversation that we have in the Gospels. So
Wow.
that in and of itself says something to me. If the Gospel of John is going to devote so much real estate to one single conversation, that immediately elevates that as being something we need to pay, careful attention to. And in this conversation that Jesus has with the woman, it encompasses the most provocative topics of the day. He's talking about things like race and sexuality and oppression and power dynamics. And I mean, we kind of put our modern terms on those things, but he covers the most provocative topics of the times. And yet he does so in a way that is so kind, so compassionate, so gracious and gentle, that she isn't rebuffed by the conversation, but instead she's drawn in to the grace of God. And of course, it leads to her salvation. And then Jesus goes back with her into this little village, and he spends 2 days there. And what's interesting is the gospel writer John gives us the whole conversation, devotes so much real estate to what happens during their encounter, but then just only tells us that Jesus spent 2 days in the village in Shechem, in Sychar. And we don't know what happened during those 2 days. But what we do know is that this begins a long-term love affair that Jesus has with the Samaritans. And he
Mm.
engages them throughout the Gospels. And it comes right down to his ascension, where that he is giving his final instructions to the disciples. And he says, I'm going to the Father, I'm ascending. He's already told them in John 14, he's going to prepare a place for them. And then he says, I want you to go to Jerusalem, Judea, and by the way, don't forget my friends, the Samaritans. So there's something about this that has just always been fascinating to me, because I think it shows us a beautiful picture of radical kindness and civility when it is so easy to engage in hostility. And so that's
Wow.
what the message of the book is really all about. The idea that I'm dealing with is, how can we have courageous conversations with people that aren't contentious? How can we engage, not avoid, but engage around the challenging conversations, the challenging ideas and topics of our time, but do so in such a way that even if people don't agree with us, they still feel compelled to engage with us and they encounter the love of God in and through us. So, long answer to a short question. Again, I'm not a soundbite guy, by the way, but that's all the heart wrapped up in this book that I'm sharing.
No, I love that. And I think what an important book, or what an important conversation to have is, just in the same way. I mean, I read that story and you see the disciples kind of, they come along and they're like, whoa, what's going on here? It's almost like, what's Jesus doing? He's out of place. He's in the wrong spot, talking to the wrong person. And I think, as we enter we're in 2024, so there's an election attached to this year, and there's the idea of divisiveness in our country is a very large topic. And so I just think the importance of this is high. And even
Yeah,
speaking
yeah,
to our young adults and those that are listening today, we're in workplaces. We're figuring out, we're making decisions on some of these things. We're experiencing. I remember when I was in my early 20s, and so I graduated college, and it's like, oh, the world is different than how I pictured it when I was on my parents' insurance or whatever the case is. Like, there's higher stakes.
sure.
You encounter things in a different way, and you encounter people in a different way. For you guys
And
took a huge.
it's if I could just, I was just
Oh
going to
yeah.
weigh in there and build on that and say, we all tend to make assumptions about people without having conversations
Mm,
about who they really are and why they do what they do. And I think this is true of all of us. It's easy to see people as blocks, as monoliths, in a way that is sort of collective and not personal, not individual. We tend to see them as groups. And that then leads us to making assumptions about all people. All people are this way. All Christians are this way. All gay people are this way. All Republicans are this way. Democrats are this way. So we just have this way of painting with the broadest of brush when it comes to people. And I don't see Jesus doing that in the Gospels. I see Jesus having these deep and rich and meaningful conversations with people. And it's not that he always answers, their questions. In fact, there's something like 113 questions asked of Jesus in the Gospels, and he only responds to like three of them. So it's not like he's saying, you're going to control the conversation and I'm going to live on the hot seat and I'm going to be in this defensive, contentious posture. Not at all. He has the conversation with them. They ask the questions. He gets his point across and tells them what he wants them to know. And people love to be around Jesus. So the question for me is that, do people love to be around us as Christians, as believers, as followers of Jesus? Do they love to be around our churches? And I love the church. I'm a church kid. I'm an aging church kid, but I'm a church kid. So I'm not bashing the church. I believe, God has a plan for the church despite our weaknesses and the things that, we've gotten wrong. So, but the question is, do people want to be around church people? Do they want to be around our churches? And if the answer to those things is no, then I need to ask, what is it about my faith that is rebuffing people? Is it because that the gospel itself is the rub? And we do know the gospel is the rub. We do
Right.
understand the fact that the gospel is a, stumbling block. It's a rock of offense. It is what it is. But I think more often than not, Stephen, people aren't rebuffed by what we believe as much as they are by how we present what we believe. So the idea in Loving Samaritans is to hold this tension between truth and tone, to hold firmly to what we believe, but to be the kind of people that are kind and gracious and compassionate and treatable and gentle and peaceable. And that gives the gospel a fair hearing with more people than what I think we realize.
Yeah, and you speak of loving God and loving your neighbor, and the idea that we don't have to pick one or the other. And so, I guess a question for you is, where have we gotten this wrong? And from your vantage point, and obviously neither one of us are saying, "Hey, we're perfect. We've got it all figured it out."
Yeah, no.
But when you look out at the landscape and you look out, even just through your own perception, your own experiences, where have we gone wrong in this idea that in order to love God, we have to not it's not a beholding the line on truth, but treat people poorly because of their lifestyle or what's going on in them.
Great question.
Big one,
No,
though.
it's a really, really good question. And as you're asking it, I'm thinking of a couple of different things. On one hand, I think I might be able to observe a few discernible ways in our culture today where we're getting it wrong. But then the other thought I had there in that moment was, I don't know that we've gotten it right a lot. I don't know that we've gotten it right a lot. So going back to, you mentioned the disciples earlier, Jesus is in the conversation with the Samaritan woman, and the disciples come back and they're just troubled by this. They're triggered by this. Here they are, followers of Jesus, beginning to embrace his mission more and more, beginning to understand who he is and what the Father has sent him to accomplish. And they're still struggling to get on board with that. And then you come into the birthing of the church following his ascension and them going to Jerusalem. And for 10 years, the church is largely divided. For 10 years, the church is,
Right.
is primarily an extension of Judaism. It's a decade before that it begins to be integrated, before that, Gentiles come in, before that Acts 15 occurs. And the conclusion is that we're not going to lay any burden on people coming to faith in Jesus apart from what is fundamental and essential. And so I think more often than not, we've taken a line from the disciples and we're modeling or replicating their behavior rather than the behavior of Jesus. And maybe their behavior is just human nature. By by human nature, by our own very nature, we tend to be tribalistic. We tend to be individualistic. We tend to be about self-preservation. We're about our platforms and our interests and our, followers and our likes. And, it's just it's the idolatry of self that we live compelled by and attached to. And it just doesn't make a lot of room for other people. So I think there's a lot in that. But I think what I'm calling the church to is, number one, back to what it means to be in Christ, what it means to have Jesus be formed and being formed in you as your life and identity is being formed and shaped by him, so that we're living out his mission in the world today. And his mission was always about including others. It was always, he drew these really big circles without compromising what he believed. He was equally comfortable in the home of sinners as he was Pharisees. Of course, fundamentally, we're all sinners, right? But he was in the home of the religious elite, and he was in the home of those that had no discernible faith. And he was comfortable in those spaces and places because he knew that he was there on mission, and that was to love people So that's what I think we're all called to be. We're to love God and we're to love people as we love ourselves.
Wow, and I love that. I mean, Jesus, yes, when he entered a room, whether it was tax collectors and Zacchaeus and calling all of Zacchaeus's, and the thing of that story that's so powerful. We don't know what happened in Zacchaeus's home, but Zacchaeus comes out repentant and saying, "Everything I've stolen from, I'll give 4 times more," and all those things. And I think like that's the beautiful thing is that without compromise, Jesus encounters people and they change. And I think we're maybe it's like growing up in the church myself, I think a lot of fear was part of my upbringing of if you spend time, then you'll lose your way. And
Yeah.
what does it mean to like live in such a way that we encounter those places and walk into those situations and similarly people walk out saying I want what he's got, like whoever he's representing, whatever they want for my life, I want it. How do we do that? Like what's that look like for you guys? I know you guys made a big move from the suburbs into Phoenix to live amongst people. So how has that experience been for you guys?
Yeah, we did. We made the move. We've lived in the suburbs for 20 some odd years, and the suburbs are a mission field too. So
Absolutely.
I
Yeah.
don't want to get the wrong impression there. In our case, though, we're living where homes are a little divided, and it's just so easy to pull into your neighborhood and wave at a neighbor, not have a meaningful conversation, pull into a garage, go into your house, get back in your car, and repeat, wash and rinse, and repeat the next day.
Yep.
And for us, we just said, look, we have been privileged to grace to build a flourishing church that's a large church. And you get to a certain point where that, for me, I've always been resistant to the idea of being a CEO because I'm called to be a pastor. And as churches grow, they have to be organized. And there is an economy of scale in which that we can be more effective when we are, using our resources strategically to help people and all that. But I just felt like we needed to get back into rolling up our shirt sleeves and engaging in the lives of unchurched people. And I've often put it this way: we decided to stop outsourcing our compassion. And what I meant by that was having other staff members, do the work, or, we all sort of do that. We all give to the Salvation Army around Christmas time and, the March of Dimes, and we give to Charity Water, and we give to A21 and anti-trafficking efforts. And then we kind of think, well, I wrote a check, or, well, we don't write checks anymore, but, I Venmoed them. And so I've done my part. And it's just easy to do that. And so we decided that we wanted to stop outsourcing our compassion and just get back into the lives of people. And so that for us meant leaving the suburbs and moving right here into the urban core and living in a building, a high-rise building that is sort of a microcosm of our city in general. And I can look right out from this little sort of office area we have, and I can see all the other units, and I can see people whose lifestyles are radically different from my own. And yet I've been able to build a relationship with them over the last couple of years that we've lived here. And it all comes back to the idea for me that fundamentally what we see Jesus doing there in that conversation is a model of cultural engagement. So I want to be clear on that. It's a model of how to engage the world around us. And one of the ways we do that is by coming back to the idea that, first of all people are worthy of respect. All people are worthy of respect. All people are worthy of being heard. All people are worthy of hearing the truth without insult. And all people are worthy of unconditional love. I don't know if every conversation is going to lead to someone's salvation. And I want everybody to know this Jesus that we know and love, who's changed our lives and whom we will forever be grateful for and spend all of eternity with. I want them to come to know Jesus. I am not shy about my evangelistic passion, but I also recognize that even if that isn't the outcome, it is worth investing into the relationship. It's worth the time spent with them. It's worth the journey that we do in community with other people. So I think that it's really important for us to, come back to the idea that being with people has a value in and of itself. The ministry of presence matters. And even if it doesn't always lead to the same outcome. So I think I've drifted a long ways from your original question there, but I won't even try to get back to it. But yeah, this is the idea that's at the core concern of the book.
What are some of the practical ways that you have done this and that our listeners today can maybe start to rethink this and start to say, okay, well, who are the Samaritans? It was pretty well defined, for the disciples to understand who this woman is and what that
Yeah.
means. But who are the Samaritans, and what are some of the practical things that you've done and that we can do to begin to engage in a new, loving, radically kind way?
First of all, the Samaritans, that they represent the others in the world today. And we know how this goes. As I look at my neighbors, they're the other. As they look at me, I'm the other.
Right.
So rather than it being the face of any, particular individual, I'm trying to portray the face of people who just aren't like us for whatever reason. And othering is something that often happens when we see people and we label them, we define them, we put them into categories. And then in the more extreme cases, we end up marginalizing them. And in the most extreme cases, we end up dehumanizing them. So
Mhm.
there's a whole sort of spectrum of othering that often just begins with me thinking they're not like me, I'm not like them. And rather than realizing we are all fundamentally human, we are image bearers, we are the reflection of the divine. And it comes back to there was something you said a moment ago. I want to grab this back real quick. Oh, something I thought of a moment ago. So, one of the reasons why that we oftentimes don't engage with people, you referenced it, fear. Fear is
Mhm.
huge. This conversation is about fear because fear others people, fear demonizes people, fear has a way of rejecting people. And sometimes that fear, as you put it a moment ago, comes back to the idea of us being afraid that we might be infected or contaminated, that we might end up with whatever they believe becoming the dominant narrative in our lives. It's like we were kids on the playground and boys didn't want to get near the girls because the girls were going to give them cooties. And then we all realized, hey, we like the girls and we want cooties because this is just the way that life goes. So we grew up. We grew up out of being afraid of the other to realizing the beauty in the other. But I think this is what happens when we are afraid. And sometimes, Stephen, we're afraid because that we don't know the strength of our identity in Christ. And sometimes we're afraid because we live with this sense of fragility when it comes to righteousness. So we think that, my righteousness can be contaminated. Well, the fact is that righteousness is a gift that comes from Jesus anyhow. It's not a reward from good behavior. So if Jesus gave it to me, he will finish what he has begun in me. He's given us that promise that he will secure me and he will keep us from falling. So I don't have to live with this fear of my righteousness being contaminated. I can live deeply anchored with my identity in Jesus. I can continue the journey of being formed and matured, and I can engage with people around me without the fear of their lives becoming my life.
That's so good. And I think along with that, some of the deepest relationships in my life and some of the surprising relationships in my life have been people that I've pressed past that initial fear, and maybe even was wanting to label, but once I got to know the person, I didn't change, my beliefs didn't change,
Right.
my theology didn't change, but my love for them, the way that I saw them, the way that I heard them and experienced them has changed deeply, and I'm so grateful for that. And but it is, as you could say, messy, as I think a lot of discipleship
Yeah.
and true Christian living is.
I would encourage your viewers and your listeners around something I think is really important, and that's listening well, deep listening. And I think that is pretty practical. There's some practicality within that because I think that the way that we build bridges to people around us, whether they're in our immediate circle of influence, a family, a work group, or a neighborhood, uh, listening well is a radical act of love. And I don't think we listen well in our world today. I know I'm certainly working on it. And one of the reasons we don't listen well is because listening relates to the state of our interior lives. And if we don't cultivate a quiet and peaceable spirit, if we don't curate a non-anxious presence in our life, then we don't listen well. And some of us just in today's soundbite world, I mean, our world is just, a sea of information, of bits and bytes and screens and images and words, and it's all this noise that we consistently live in, and sometimes we just allow that noise then to become as loud in us as what it is around us, and we don't listen well. I want to encourage people to engage in the practice of active listening. And what does that mean? That means in conversations, express curiosity, ask the question, do what you're doing with me, asking the question, then the follow-up question, then the follow-up question, and being okay with some uncomfortable silences. That's relationship building. We have conversations like the one we're having that we just met and we're just flowing back and forth here. And I have those with my neighbors, but then I may get in an elevator and it might be awkward, and I'm listening. Why was this conversation yesterday with a coworker, just really easy, and today it's really hard? Well, there's probably a story. There's an experience. There's something going on there that has changed the tone of this relationship, of this conversation. So I need to exert high emotional, high EQ, a high emotional quotient, asking what's going on? What are they saying in their silence? What are they saying in their words? What's going on in their lives? And what I love about Jesus is that he was and is a master listener. All throughout the Gospels, he made people feel seen, feel heard, and feel known. And if we can just do that, Stephen, those are three things. If I can get up tomorrow morning, if you can get up, and if we can make the decision, all of your listeners and viewers, that today I'm going to make people feel seen, I'm going to make them feel heard, and I'm going to make them feel known. Those are three extraordinary gifts that we can give to the world around us. And Jesus did that. So it's rooted in curiosity. That's a part of active listening. It's rooted in getting the center of my life off of myself and onto you. And of course, this is a big issue when you're young. Big issue, when you're just trying to find your bearings in life and you're trying to determine your career. First of all, you're trying to determine your major in college. And after you've changed it 5 or 6 times, then you're trying to determine your trajectory in your career and, who's the person for me, who's the partner that I believe God has planned for my life. And then just all these things that are part of our life that we find ourselves in. And as we're doing that, as we're journeying through life, listen deeply, listen well, listen as an act of kindness and compassion and curiosity, because listening always leads to the best of things. But in this sea of information, when we're trying to work our way through life, sometimes it's hard to prioritize that. And yet I see a lot of young people doing it really well.
This is so helpful. And I think as I mentioned earlier, as we are in a election year and the conversations have picked up, I think, when it comes to, we're going to come encountering people that do differ from us and think different than us and have different beliefs than us. I think that's just a great word of advice, and a great place to start is listening is love. Listening is kindness. It's compassion, to help them feel, what was it, valued, seen, and known. I think that's just
to be
incredible
seen
start.
and heard and known. Everybody wants to be seen. Everybody wants to be heard. Everybody wants to be known. And Jesus did that. And he did that not simply as a model. I don't want to reduce it down to the fact that Jesus just gave us a model, because that just feels so transactional. But more than that, it's a way of being. He showed us a way of being. He showed us humanity at its best. And of course, he was fully God and fully anointed by the Holy Spirit, but he's showing us the way life should be lived. And I think that's just would be really helpful, because you're right. We're going to go through a contentious year. I hate that. Every election cycle comes back around. We're in our echo chambers, and our algorithms are feeding us what we, have searched, or what we've researched, or what, it's reinforcing what we believe. And so we're becoming more and more entrenched, and more rigid, and more inflexible. And that then leads to us seeing people as a threat. It's this whole process that we go through when we see people as the threat. And I'm saying that's not good for America. Number one, for us to see our neighbors as the threat. It's not good for the church to see our neighbors as the threat. It's not what God wants for humanity. And so much of what we're talking about, Stephen, is about neighboring. Jesus gives us the picture of the Good Samaritan, and essentially says, "Go thou and do likewise." We're called to be good neighbors. And that's a fundamental question that I would encourage every one of your listeners and viewers to ask. How am I a good neighbor? And what can I do to be a better neighbor? Because it's in good neighboring that we care for the soul of our community. We care for the well-being of those who are around us. And we really amplify the message of the gospel. Jesus said to the disciples that it's in our love for each other, and I can expand that safely to say that it's in our love for our neighbors that, the world even around us knows that we are his. So I would encourage people this year, hold your beliefs. None of what we're talking about is a compromise of beliefs. None of this is about remapping scripture. None of this is about, compromising what we believe to be core convictions. But I don't think people are rebuffed and repelled so much by our core beliefs as they are by the tone in which we communicate those beliefs. Wow. And the tone is about being a good neighbor. And that's what I'm saying. Take our ego off the table. It's not about us, if they accept us or reject us. This is Jesus. It's his gospel. He died for our salvation. And so take our ego off the table and stay engaged with people, listen deeply, and love well.
Thank you. That is so good. Oh man. I think as we walk away from this episode, and I've got one more question for you, but as we walk away from this episode, I think that's so encouraging. It's a practical place that we can start, and just the neighbors and what we have around us, and how this next year is going to unfold. I think this book, which I encourage everybody to pick up, Loving Samaritans, it's on Amazon. It's all those places that you can get your books. I think it's going to be a must read as we enter this year. So thank you so much for writing it. But one question I ask every guest on the show is, what is one piece of advice you would give to like your 22-year-old self? If you were to face off with 22-year-old Terry, what advice would you give him?
I would tell 22-year-old Terry to take a breath and be okay with the seasons as they unfold. And what I mean by that is at 22, man, I wanted to be 32. I wanted to be 42, and my friends were much older than me. And I was always trying to live into a season ahead rather than just being present in the season that I was in. And I've discovered as I've journeyed through life that God's made provision for every one of the seasons of our life. Be in your 20s. You're in your 20s, enjoy it, steward the moments, be faithful to Jesus, cultivate a healthy soul, let Christ be formed in you through the process of spiritual formation as you're being formed in him. And then in your 30s, those seasons will be there for you. And I think a lot of young people are just trying to live ahead, and they're driven by pressure, and that leads to anxiety and comparison and inadequacy and insecurity. And I'm just going to simply say, God has planned for every season of your life. So live the season that you're in, be present to it, enjoy it, learn the lessons in it, and the next season will take care of itself.
Oh, that was great. Thank you so much, Terry. This has just been a really fun conversation for me, a refreshing conversation, and I know our audience is going to be blessed by it. So thanks just for taking the time. And everybody,
Thank you.
Loving Samaritans. It's going to be out January 30th. So that is a perfect time to pick this one up. It's going to bless your life. So thanks again, Terry, for coming on the podcast.
Thank you, brother. It's been a joy. I've had a lot of fun too, and appreciate the honor of being on your podcast.